The rain had just started to patter against the wide glass windows of my Portland office when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer calls after closing hours usually meant another supplier issue or a mechanic needing overtime approval. But when I saw the name flash across the screen, I froze. Maris. It had been weeks since my daughter last spoke to me without tension threading her voice. Ever since my husband, Daniel, passed nearly a decade ago. I had tried to be both parent and provider, pouring myself into the chain of auto repair shops we had built together. Maris had drifted further away with each passing year, her silences sharp enough to cut. "Mom," she said quickly, almost too cheerfully, "how about we do something together this weekend? Just you and me, hiking in the Cascades. We could use the fresh air for a moment." I didn't respond. Hiking Maris hated even the shortest walks, always claiming the outdoors bored her. Memories pressed in her teenage years filled with malls and screens. Her impatience on family camping trips when Daniel tried to teach her how to pitch a tent. The suggestion felt foreign, almost rehearsed. Still, my chest tightened with a fragile hope. I thought of Daniel's funeral, the way Maris had clutched my hand with trembling fingers, whispering she would never leave me. That promise had echoed in my mind during lonely nights when the house felt unbearably silent. Maybe this trip was her way of keeping it. Even after all these years of distance, that sounds unexpected. I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed, light but hollow. "Come on, Mom. You always said nature clears the head. Let's give it a try." I leaned back in Daniel's old leather chair, the smell of motor oil lingering faintly on my hands from the shop floor earlier. My instincts whispered caution, reminding me of every unresolved argument and every strange note in her tone these past months. But against that whisper rose something louder, my yearning for connection, my desire to believe my daughter wanted me. "All right, Maris," I said softly, "let's go hiking." The line went quiet for half a beat before she exhaled in relief. "Great. I'll send you the details." When the call ended, I sat in silence, the rain steady outside, telling myself I had chosen hope. The weekend was already waiting, and so was the trail. The morning air in the Cascades was sharp enough to sting my lungs, and the trail wound upward through pines that dripped with dew. Maris walked a few paces ahead, her new boots crunching over loose stones. She looked oddly energized, glancing back at me with a smile that felt more like a mask than a moment of joy. "Mom, tell me again about your Navy days," she called, adjusting the straps on her pack. "How did you survive out there with nothing but training?" Her sudden interest unsettled me. For years she had brushed off those stories, rolling her eyes at my insistence that discipline built character. Now she was pressing for details: how I found water in hostile terrain, how I kept calm when supplies ran low. I answered in measured tones, trying to ignore the strange glint in her eyes as she scribbled something into a small notebook she'd tucked into her jacket pocket. The climb grew steeper, and I stopped to steady myself, pressing a hand against the bark of a fir tree. When I looked up, Maris was off to the side, her head bent low over her phone. Her lips moved in a whisper, quick and urgent, but when she noticed me watching, she slipped it away and forced another smile. "You okay back there?" she asked, voice a little too bright. I nodded, though unease coiled in my stomach every few minutes. She found another excuse to check her phone, the map. She said, "Or the weather." The excuses never quite rang true. I wanted to ask outright, to demand honesty, but instead I bit back the words. It had taken so much to get her here with me, and I couldn't bear to risk shattering that fragile bridge. So I told myself she was just nervous, that the woods unsettled her. I let hope drown out the whisper in my gut, the one that had kept me alive in places far harsher than this trail, and with each step deeper into the forest. I convinced myself it was love, not danger, that waited ahead. The forest had grown darker as we pressed farther along the trail, the canopy weaving overhead so tightly that sunlight only broke through in fractured streaks. The air smelled of wet moss and pine, heavy with silence except for the steady trickle of water nearby. Maris paused, shifting her pack and glancing at me with a faint smile. "Mom, can you grab some water from that stream? I'll set up a spot for us to rest." Her tone was casual, almost warm, and for a moment it made me feel like we'd found our rhythm again. I stepped carefully down the embankment, crouched beside the cold stream, and let the water run over my fingers before filling my bottle. It was colder than I expected, numbing my skin as if reminding me how far we were from the safety of roads and towns. When I climbed back up, bottle capped and ready, the clearing was empty. At first I thought she had just wandered into the trees. "Maris." My voice echoed strangely through the pines. I waited, listening for footsteps. A laugh. Anything. But there was only the rustle of branches in the wind. That was when I saw it, a single sheet of paper weighted on a moss-covered rock. My name scrawled across the front. My chest tightened as I unfolded it. Just one word stared back at me in her handwriting. "Goodbye." I stood frozen, my hand trembling, reading it over and over as if the letters might rearrange into something less cruel. My daughter, my only child, had walked away. Not lost. Not mistaken, but by choice. The betrayal slammed into me with the force of a storm. For a long moment, grief pinned me where I stood. Memories of late nights working double shifts to pay her tuition. Of Daniel's dying breath when he made me promise to take care of her, flashed like jagged lightning. I pressed the note against my chest, the paper dampening with my sweat, but grief could not feed me. Nor could it shield me from the dangers of the forest. The years of Navy training stirred, pulling me back from the edge of despair. Shelter, water, movement, ordered discipline, not tears, would keep me alive. I folded the note carefully, tucked it into my jacket pocket, and forced my legs to move forward into the silence of the trees. I stood alone in the clearing, the note still burning in my pocket, and forced myself to take inventory. My hands patted down my jacket as if I might conjure something more. A small pocket knife I always carried, layered clothing against the cold, my water bottle half full from the stream. No food, no map, no compass, nothing else. The weight of it pressed on me. If Maris had intended this as some twisted lesson, she'd chosen well. She had stripped me to almost nothing. I closed my eyes and let my breath steady, the way it had during Navy drills years ago when panic had to be silenced, or it would kill you faster than enemy fire. Shelter, water, fire, movement. 4 words, drilled into me until they became second nature. If I followed them, I had a chance. I looked around at the towering pines, the layers of needles beneath my boots, and chose west toward where I thought the main road might be. The forest was silent except for the faint tapping of a woodpecker. My own pulse was louder. As I walked, memories surfaced unbidden, each step pulling them forward. 3 jobs in my 30s. My hands blistered from long shifts so Maris could attend the private school her father had dreamed of for her. $40,000 a year for tuition, just so she would never know the same limits I had. Later, her college fees, her first car, $18,000 in cash because she refused a used one. I told myself it was love. But now, in the stillness of the woods, I saw it for what it had been. I had bought her comfort, and in the process, erased her resilience. The realization cut deeper than the betrayal itself. I had made her soft, dependent, waiting for the world to hand her what I had bled for. And now she had turned that softness into cruelty. The anger that rose in me was sharp, clean, a fire stronger than fear. It filled my chest, steadied my stride, and reminded me that I was not a woman who would lay down in the dirt to die. I gripped the knife in my pocket, lifted my chin, and moved deeper into the trees. The ground grew softer beneath my boots. Patches of damp soil broken by prints far larger than my own. I crouched low, tracing the rounded pads pressed into the mud, the claw marks deep at the tips. Fresh. A bear had passed through here not long ago. My heart tightened, but training whispered, "The rule, don't surprise them." I began to hum, low at first, then louder, adding the rhythm of my boots on fallen branches so any creature nearby would know I was coming. The game trail twisted through the undergrowth, narrowing until I had to push aside branches that scraped my arms. I kept moving, every step forward an act of defiance. Then, faint at first, I caught at the growl of engines, not the roar of trucks, but something smaller, closer. ATVs. I broke into a run, lungs burning, until the trees thinned and light poured over me. Bursting into the clearing, I stumbled to a halt. 4 riders had paused beside their machines, helmets half lifted as they turned toward me. A tall man in his 40s removed his helmet, weathered lines carved deep around his eyes. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, voice carrying both concern and authority. I could barely form the words. "My daughter, she left me out here. Took everything. Just left." Their faces shifted instantly from confusion to horror. One of the women swore under her breath. The man stepped closer, steadying my shaking arm. "Name's Oliver Keene, former ranger. Abandoning someone in this wilderness, that's attempted murder." The word landed heavy, but I didn't flinch. Murder. Yes, that was what she had chosen. Oliver gestured to his group. "We'll get you out, safe and quick." I straightened, meeting his eyes with a steel I hadn't felt in years. On one condition. I said, "Get me back before she does." His brow furrowed, but he nodded once, as if he understood there was more at stake than survival. I climbed onto the back of his ATV, the engine roaring beneath us, and the forest began to blur behind as we raced toward the road. The ATV jolted over ruts and stones, the wind cutting sharp against my face as Oliver steered us onto a trail so narrow I thought only deer could pass through. "Old ranger access," he called back. Cuts hours off the drive. His voice was steady, practiced, the kind of tone that made you believe he'd led 100 rescues through terrain just like this. I gripped the frame tight and let the rhythm of the ride push me into thought. Daniel's face surfaced, unbidden, the way he had looked the night he pressed my hand and made me promise to raise Maris strong. Not sheltered, not dependent. He had known me well enough to see the danger in my guilt, how easily it could turn into overprotection. And he had been right. I had confused love with rescue, strength with comfort. Regret sat heavy in my chest, but alongside it burned a sharper resolve. If Maris had left me in the forest believing I would vanish quietly, she was about to learn what kind of woman she had underestimated. The trail wove downhill, crossing shallow creeks, bending beneath towering evergreens, until it spilled us onto a gravel road that soon joined the highway. Civilization reappeared in fragments, mailboxes at the edge of driveways, the faint hum of traffic. Then the outline of a small town. Oliver slowed the ATV and pointed toward the cluster of buildings ahead. "She'll take longer. Going around the main road." He said, "You'll be back before her." I nodded, the weight of those words settling like armor. Back before her. That was all I needed, at the lodge. I checked into a room that smelled faintly of cedar and old quilts. Oliver lingered at the doorway, watching me with the quiet respect of someone who knew this wasn't over. I thanked him and shut the door behind me. Alone, I set my pack down on the bed and stood still for a moment, listening to the hush of the room. My heart no longer raced with fear, it beat with strategy. Even as the forest dirt clung to my boots, my mind was already shaping the counterattack. I placed my travel bag on the cedar desk and unzipped it slowly, the sound sharp in the quiet lodge room. My hands trembled only once before I forced them steady. From the hidden pocket, I drew out the folder I had packed in Portland legal documents I'd revised weeks earlier. Back when Maris first began pressing for more money, at the time, it had felt like a gesture of disappointment, a boundary drawn in ink. Now, they were my shield. I spread the papers across the desk. The new will was clear every asset, every share of the shops. Every account would go not to Maris, but to veterans organizations, wildlife conservation groups, and a scholarship fund named for Daniel. His name at the top of the page steadied me. For years I had tried to keep my promise to him by giving Maris everything, but perhaps this was the truer way, ensuring his legacy helped those who still valued effort and grit. A knock at the adjoining door broke my thoughts. Oliver stepped in, a small camera bag slung over his shoulder. "Got the equipment," he said. "Audio and video. If she says anything incriminating, we'll have it all." I nodded, letting him set up near the vent, where the angle covered both the door and the desk. He worked with the practiced quiet of someone who had seen too much wilderness tragedy, his presence grounding me. When he left, the room felt heavier. The documents stared back at me. Not just words, but the story of everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed. And yet, they also carried the proof of my failure. Maris's weakness was not born in a vacuum. I had made her soft, thinking I was protecting her. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my voice barely above a whisper. I created her weakness, but I won't let her destroy me. The words tasted of both confession and vow. The clock on the nightstand ticked steadily toward the hour I knew she would arrive. I rose, squared my shoulders, and positioned myself at the desk. The papers fanned out like a waiting verdict. The key scraped against the lock, followed by the slow creak of the door. Maris stepped inside, her expression carrying the smug satisfaction of someone expecting silence. When her eyes met mine across the room, her smile froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her standing rigid in the doorway. "Mom," her voice cracked. How are you here?" I sat calmly at the desk. The papers spread out in front of me. "Turns out I'm harder to get rid of than you thought." She took a step back, fingers twitching against the strap of her bag. "You don't understand." I understand perfectly." I cut in. My hand rested on the folded note I had pulled from my pocket. I raised it slowly. This said everything. One word. "Maris, goodbye. You left me in the middle of that forest to die." Her mask cracked, bitterness spilling through. "You've controlled me my whole life, every decision, every dollar, always with strings attached. You never let me stand on my own." I held her gaze. "And so you chose murder instead," she faltered, then straightened, her chin high. "I deserve what you built. Everything. You kept me weak just so you could feel strong." Quietly, I slid the will across the desk. "You inherit nothing. Every cent, every shop, every house gone to causes that will actually honor your father's name." Her composure shattered. She lunged forward, snatching the papers, scanning them with frantic eyes. "No, you can't do this." Her voice rose, breaking into a plea. "Mom, please, I'll change. "I'll be better." Then fury twisted her features. "This is your fault. You made me this way." I didn't move. Behind the adjoining door, Oliver's equipment hummed, capturing every word, every confession. Maris collapsed into the chair opposite me, the papers trembling in her hands, unaware that her downfall was already sealed. The room filled with silence after Maris's last outburst, broken only by the faint hum of the recording device. I dialed the front desk with steady hands, asking them to send for the authorities. There was no shouting when they arrived, no dramatic struggle. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, and Maris's protests shifted from rage to disbelief as they placed her in handcuffs. "You can't do this. She's my mother," she cried, twisting against their grip. I stayed seated, my voice calm. A daughter wouldn't leave her mother to die. They led her out, the echo of her voice fading down the hallway. The door closed behind them, and the room grew still again. I stared at the empty chair she'd occupied, the papers scattered across its seat. The ache in my chest wasn't triumph, and it wasn't revenge, it was clarity. The girl I had raised was gone, and perhaps she had been gone for years. What remained was someone I no longer recognized, someone who had chosen greed over love in the middle of a forest. Oliver entered quietly, his camera bag slung over his shoulder. He studied me for a moment, then said softly, "You didn't survive by chance. You survived because you're strong." I nodded, though strength felt like a hollow word. "Strong enough to lose her," I whispered. He placed a hand on the back of the chair, steady and grounding. "No. Strong enough to finally see her for who she is." I gathered the documents, folded them with precision, and slipped them back into my bag. The work ahead was no longer about survival. It was about rebuilding, and I knew exactly where to begin. Portland's spring rain greeted me when I returned home, the streets glistening beneath gray skies that no longer felt heavy. At my attorney's office, I signed the final papers establishing the Rowan Foundation in Daniel's name. The shops would fund scholarships, veterans programs, and conservation efforts, causes that honored his grit and the values we once shared. As I set the pen down, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Days later, I walked my neighborhood at dusk, the scent of lilacs drifting from front gardens. For the first time in years, my steps felt unburdened. I wasn't looking over my shoulder for Maris's next demand or drowning in guilt over not being enough. The silence around me was no longer loneliness. It was peace. One evening, a letter arrived from the jail. 5 pages, neatly written in Maris's hand. She apologized, explained, pleaded, between the lines. Though, I recognized the same manipulation, the promises of change, if only I would reconsider. If only I would give again. I read each word once, then fed the pages into my shredder. The sound of the blades chewing through the paper was final, almost cleansing. Standing there, I realized the truth. I had not only survived the wilderness, I had survived the kind of motherhood that had twisted me with guilt and blinded me with fear. Some endings do not break you. Some endings save you. Some goodbyes are the beginning of peace.